Hello chess fans. In this video we're going to see a great short attacking game from Viswanathan Anand against Boris Gelfand. Although the tactics that he's going to finish the game with are very instructive and easy to incorporate in your own play, don't miss the details of how he builds his attack and includes all his pieces. Anand opens the game with the move e4. After c5, knight c3, we already get a surprise at the highest level. Knight c3 here introduces the closed Sicilian or the Grand Prix Sicilian as it's going to become on the next move. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that you play this if you don't get the kind of tactics that Anand gets in this game, which is not a given at all. Then basically, the structure is very limited. You don't have a lot of ideas to outplay your opponent. You lack a lot of pawn breaks and flexibility in the closed Sicilian. However, Anand has a very specific idea. He's seen some previous games from Gelfand. He's seen one game where Gelfand lost a short in the structure, and he wants to play for his particular idea, so he pulls out the closed Sicilian for this game and this game only. After the following moves here, we get to a unique move, I think, with h6. Now, I have to confess that my understanding of this is a bit limited here. I'm not a closed Sicilian expert. Anand mentions, and it seems pretty clear, that the move castling, while natural, is going to walk into the move f5. And Anand says basically white gets a free attack here. However, I feel like castling is the most natural move in the position. And analysis from Stockfish is that you can survive after f5. I don't see an immediate knockout blow for white, and black's chances seem quite reasonable to me here, even though it is very, very dangerous. So I kind of think that you should play the move castling here because h6 is not a very useful move, and it's even going to create tactical opportunities in multiple variations later for Anand in this game. So if it's possible to survive, and I haven't seen analysis yet to disprove it, though maybe you can provide it, then I think you just have to castle and try to refute the move f5 rather than playing moves like h6, which don't seem very useful. However, h6 does happen. Bishop b3 is played in response, which is trying to pull the bishop back against a possible d5, not right away, but very soon. After a6, e5 happens. This is the idea Anand had that he was interested in playing and encouraged him. This idea encouraged him to go down this path of the closed Sicilian. e5 is all about the dark squares, as are the moves that are going to come in just a few moments here. First off, note that the move d5, which might look good to some of you out there, is a pretty bad variation of like a French defense structure for black. After a move like knight e2, this bishop has a future if you pull it back after a pawn move. White will have obviously a lot more space here, and this bishop doesn't really belong over here in French defense structures. So white is all told doing really quite well in these structures that are coming about. I know Danny Wrench would love to have the white side of this. So knight f5 is played instead. King h1 is played and knight fd4 is played. Again, I would say maybe castles or taking on e5 or the most principled moves. They're a bit scary for black, but they do seem like the more principled moves. Knight e4 happens now. Boom. We're all over these dark squares right here. Gelfand trades on f3, takes on e5, and has won a sacrificed pawn on e5. He's even managing to gain a tempo on the rook here. However, Anand has more development, the safer king, the only castled king in the position, and a lot of attacking chances on the dark squares. Anand retreats the rook simply to f1, and in this position, because castling is not possible, you can figure out why for yourself if you want. The key move is bishop takes h6 here, bishop takes knight check, and e5 is hanging right here. Gelfand plays the move pawn to g5. So Anand gives Gelfand a lot of credit for finding this move, which he considers basically the only move. g5 stops the bishop h6 tactic. I'll mention that h6, the move that I wasn't loving earlier, is part of the reason there's a bishop takes h6 tactic here. And it's a reason that we're going to get more tactics soon in this position. However, Anand mentions that he thinks of g5 as basically the only move, and he gives Gelfand a lot of credit for finding this move, which prepares castling next move, since bishop takes h6 will be off the table. Now, a move that you might be tempted to play here is knight takes c5, because it's a free pawn. And as we know from great chess coaches like Yasser Seirawan, we should always take free pawns. But this is a case where we're not really winning a pawn. We're only gaining one back because black already won a pawn on e5. And when we take on c5 here, our knight goes off sides and takes its eyes off of the dark squares that it's been trying to exploit. So there is a better and decisive move right here. That move is bishop e3. Bishop e3 is going after c5 here, but we're going to take with the bishop instead of the knight, and that's going to be crushing. The bishop and the knight will team up. They'll be all over black's dark squares. It'll be a decisive advantage. As a result, the only logical move for black to play is b6, defending the c5 pawn. But then we have a winning continuation. Pawn d4, not too hard to find, but after pawn takes d4, I would probably play the move rook d1. Very natural, and white does have a good chance to attack after recovering the pawn here. However, there's a much better move. Bishop takes d4, setting up huge pressure here, tremendous threats. And if black captures on d4, we can simply play rook into d1, basically trapping the queen here in the middle of the board. Okay, yes, black's queen could try to jump in here to b2, but we have quite a few ideas, the biggest one being knight to d6 check, and we can go after f7. Let's try king f8, and then knight takes f7, knight takes, rook to d8 check, king e7 here, and rook takes c8, followed by capturing on e6 is going to be decisive, which is pretty spectacular. There's other variations here too. This is not the only variation that is crushing. However, it's pretty clear that after rook d1, white is winning in this position. Beautiful, beautiful variation, really instructive attack. All of that basically means that bishop e3 is a win missed by both players. Of course, Stockfish quickly points it out, but we can't all be Stockfish. In fact, none of us can be Stockfish. So bishop e3 is an instructive move. Instead, the move queen g3, very, very direct, is played. Gelfand castles. He can't postpone it anymore. And Anand sacrifices on g5. He basically said in his analysis to this game, he didn't think about this too much. He basically said, can my opponent refute this? No. Can they easily defend this? No. It's going to be practically very difficult. All right, I'm going for it. And Anand said, as long as I get the kind of enterprising chess that I want, I'm good with this, and it's going to work out exactly the way he could have hoped. H takes g5, knight takes g5, and Anand has a big threat of queen into h7. You got to get the queen to the h file, you bring it into h7, and you're basically winning at that point. Of course, it's not so simple. And Gelfand finds the only move here, knight g6. One thing this does is generally help put some wood in the way on the g file. It makes the attack more difficult to execute with the king a little more secure from the queen's pressure on the g file. But more specifically, this stops the move queen h4, which means that the queen can't get into h7, and white is struggling to finish off his attack right here. It's a good point to pause the video and ask yourself how you would play the attack in this position. The move that Anand played is rook a to e1. We simply include our final piece in the attack. We create a lot of pressure against e6, even if there's not an immediate threat. And we pass the move back to black, and black does not have a good way to uncoil in this position. Sometimes when players are attacking, they feel that they have to go for the most aggressive continuations. Every move that they make has to be solely focused on creating a next threat. A move like h4, for example, is a move that doesn't create very specific threats, doesn't help get the queen to the h7 square. In fact, you're almost never going to be able to make that happen now, and is a move that I think a lot of people would go for. Anand's rook a to e1 is a much better move, and you should never forget to include all of your pieces in the attack like this. It will pay off down the road. Queen e7 is played, and again, if you want, you can pause the video and figure out what Anand did. He now plays the move rook f5. I love this move. It's a famous move, and it's probably the best move in this game. Anand himself gives it 2 exclamation marks. It's a very inventive move with the simple goal of defending g5 and recreating that threat of queen over to the h file and queen into h7 with checkmate or a winning attack. Of course, the rook can't be captured because of the pin here, and the queen on e7 would hang. So Gelfand, now faced with very serious threats, plays the move bishop f6 to attack the knight on g5. So there's no time to introduce the queen because the knight on g5 is loose. However, bishop f6 opens up more firepower on the g file and cuts the defensive connection between the g and e6 squares. That's going to allow an immediate attack here. Knight takes e6. This is a good point to pause the video and ask yourself what you would play in Gelfand's shoes. When we're looking at these beautiful attacks, we shouldn't miss the chance to ask ourselves how we should defend them as well. Often that question can be missed. So in this position, I'm actually kind of surprised that Gelfand did not find the best defensive move. Not that it's easy, but he's Gelfand. He's totally capable of finding rook to e8 right here. Of course, if the knight moves now, we'll simply capture on e1. So the knight is stuck right here. After rook to e8, we can pull the rook back. There are other attacking ideas here, and in his biography or his collection of best games, Anand gives a ton of variations after lots and lots of stuff. But basically the summation is that the position's very complicated and unclear. After the rook pulls back, we're in a position where black is probably going to give up the queen here, and it's going to be okay for black. In fact, black might be a little bit better. Very, very complicated position, a long way from a win for black, but this does defend and even gain the better chances for the black pieces. So rook to e8, a very nice move, simply passing the move back to Anand here after he sacrificed on e6. Instead, Gelfand took on e6. Capturing the bishop basically leads to the same thing. And now we don't capture on g6, which is so obvious, right? Who wouldn't capture on g6? In a blitz game, you would surely capture on g6, right? But queen g7 defends in that position. Instead, rook takes e6 right away is the winning move here and the only move to crush this position. After rook takes e6, the thing is that if the bishop captures here, of course the queen is hanging and there's tremendous discovered threats, so you basically only have the option to capture with the bishop here if you're going to take. Now we're in a position to capture on g6. And I mentioned earlier that the move bishop f6 had destroyed the defensive connection here. If you now fix that connection, then this falls on e6. So bishop g7, bishop takes e6 will conclude the game in white's favor. If queen g7, basically the same thing. Again, bishop takes e6. And whenever the king runs, we simply have rook over to h5, and we're even mating right away right there. So all of that means that after rook takes e6, Gelfand is busted in this position, and he chose to give up the queen, but that didn't stop him from resigning. Just a couple of moves later, the move h4, intending h5, was the last move in the game here. Basically, the threat of h5 is tremendous, and black's pieces are 3/4 on the back rank, still on their starting squares. They've moved a little bit, but they've ended up back on their starting squares. And black is in no position to defend against a tremendous white queen right here. And of course, Anand is also doing really well in material too, because he's got quite a few pawns to go with his queen. So I hope you enjoyed this game. I find it to be a really beautiful game from Anand that illustrates a lot of sophistication in how he conducts his attack. There's dark square assault that's really, really instructive. You see him include both his rooks in a very effective way that would be hard, I think, for most of us to find in an actual game. And in the end, there's some nice tactics as well. You also get to see just how difficult it is for even a great player like Gelfand to defend, which is always a valuable lesson for us to kind of include in our game. We always want to be the player with the initiative, with the attack, who's putting our opponent in the position of finding those difficult moves. So if you like this game, be sure to check out some other games from Anand right over here. I'm going to have some links. We've got a playlist of Anand's videos, but we also have games from carries and other players. If you like them, be sure to share the videos with a friend, like the channel, subscribe so you'll know when we have new videos. Thank you so much and have a great day.